Case 1. Shauna D. Taylor. The mother who made her baby sick. McClenny in Jacksonville, Florida, early 2013 through 2018. Imagine standing in a hospital room, watching your baby fight for her life. Imagine watching the nurses scramble, watching the doctors run tests, scratching their heads, running more tests. Imagine crying the way only a terrified mother can cry, loud, public, desperate tears, while the medical staff works around the clock trying to figure out what is destroying this tiny infant's liver from the inside out. Now imagine that you are the one doing it. Imagine that every time the doctors get close to stabilizing your daughter, you go home, you come back, and you do it again. That is the world that a premature baby girl in Baker County, Florida, entered when she was born in 2013. And the person engineering her suffering was the one person on earth who was supposed to protect her above all others. Her name was Shauna D. Taylor. And for years, she fooled nearly everyone around her. Let us start from the beginning, because understanding how this happened requires understanding who Shauna Taylor was, or more precisely, who she presented herself to be. Shauna D. Taylor lived in McClenny, Florida, a small, quiet community in Baker County, not far from Jacksonville. By the time her youngest daughter was born prematurely in 2013, Taylor was already a mother of 10 children. 10. And what the community saw when they looked at Shauna Taylor was a devoted, overwhelmed, struggling mother doing her best under difficult circumstances. What the community did not see, what almost no one saw, was the pattern. A long, deeply troubling pattern of children in medical crisis, of hospital visits that never quite made sense, of illnesses that appeared and disappeared at inexplicable intervals. The infant at the center of this case, her youngest daughter, was born prematurely, which already made her fragile. Premature babies require specialized care. Their organs are underdeveloped. Their immune systems are immature. They are, by definition, vulnerable. For Shauna Taylor, that vulnerability appears to have been an opportunity. Medical child abuse, which the psychiatric and medical community formally recognizes, and which was previously known almost exclusively by the term Munchausen syndrome by proxy, is among the most insidious and difficult forms of child abuse to detect and prosecute. The reason is deeply, profoundly disturbing. The abuse itself looks like love. The abuser is present. The abuser is attentive. The abuser is, by all outward appearances, the most devoted caregiver in the room. The abuser is the one calling the nurses. The abuser is the one demanding answers. The abuser is the one weeping in the hallway. And the abuser is the one going home, crushing up Tylenol tablets, measuring out iron supplements, and returning to administer them to a child who is already suffering. Beginning in early 2013, Taylor's premature infant daughter began presenting at hospitals with acute liver damage. The symptoms were severe. Liver failure in an infant is not a subtle condition. It is a medical emergency. Her daughter was rushed to the hospital multiple times as her liver function deteriorated to alarming levels. Doctors could not understand it. They ran every test available to them. They checked for genetic conditions. They considered metabolic disorders. They explored every reasonable medical explanation for why this tiny premature baby's liver was failing. What they were not initially looking for, because it is one of the hardest things in medicine to look for, was the possibility that the child's own mother was poisoning her. Tylenol, known generically as acetaminophen, is one of the most common over-the-counter medications in America. Most people have a bottle of it in their medicine cabinet right now. In appropriate doses for adults, it is safe and effective. But acetaminophen is particularly toxic to the liver in overdose. It is, in fact, one of the leading causes of acute liver failure in the United States. In adults who take too much. In an infant whose liver is already compromised by premature birth, even relatively small amounts administered repeatedly can cause catastrophic, life-threatening damage. Iron supplements, similarly, are common, prescribed regularly during pregnancy, available over the counter. In excess, iron is extremely toxic, particularly to the gastrointestinal system and the liver. Taylor appears to have known exactly what she was doing. The multiple hospital visits continued. Each time, Taylor presented as the frantic, devoted mother. Each time, the medical team worked to stabilize the infant. Each time, the child would show some improvement and then deteriorate again after returning home. It was a cycle that took investigators years to fully untangle, in part because the medical evidence alone was not immediately definitive. Proving that a parent is poisoning a child requires not just medical data, but a pattern of evidence, witness accounts, elimination of alternative explanations, and often a level of investigative cooperation between medical professionals, child protective services, and law enforcement that is challenging to coordinate. What eventually brought Shauna Taylor's crimes to light was a combination of factors. The persistence of medical professionals who refused to accept that this child's condition had no explainable cause, child protective services involvement, and what investigators ultimately described as an overwhelming pattern of concerning medical history involving not just this infant, but Taylor's other children as well. Investigators found that the medical histories of Taylor's 10 children contained a troubling constellation of unexplained illnesses, hospitalizations, and medical emergencies, a pattern consistent with a mother who derived something, attention, identity, control, or some combination thereof, from having sick children. The case moved slowly, as these cases almost always do. Medical child abuse cases are prosecuted at a much lower rate than they occur precisely because the evidence is difficult to assemble and because the crime itself is so psychologically foreign to most jurors that conviction requires extensive expert testimony to help a jury understand what they are actually looking at. But investigators in Baker County and Jacksonville were determined. And on August 29, 2018, 5 years after the abuse of her infant daughter began, Shauna D. Taylor was convicted of aggravated child abuse and child neglect. 35 days later, on October 3, 2018, she was sentenced to 12 years in Florida State Prison followed by 15 years of probation. The sentencing did not undo what had been done. It did not give those years back to that premature baby girl, whose first months of life, months that should have been filled with warmth, safety, and the particular tenderness a mother offers a fragile newborn, were instead filled with pain, hospital lights, and the slow, invisible violence of a woman who was supposed to be her safe place. 12 years. For a baby she poisoned repeatedly while the hospital staff tried to save her. For a child who entered the world early and vulnerable and trusted the one person in the world who was supposed to make that vulnerability safe. Shauna D. Taylor sat in that courtroom and was led away to prison, and the children she left behind, all of them, had to find a way to make sense of a mother who looked at their suffering and made it her purpose. If that story disturbs you, and it should, stay with us, because what comes next is even harder to hear. If this case moved you, please take a moment right now to hit the like button, drop a comment below telling us what you think justice should look like in cases of medical child abuse, and make sure you are subscribed to CrimeCaseZone so you never miss a story that needs to be told. Every like and every subscription helps us keep giving voice to the victims. Now let us keep going. Case 2, Amanda E. Lewis. The pool, the phone call, and the little boy who told the truth. Esto, Holmes County, Florida, August 8, 2007. August 8, 2007. Holmes County, Florida. The summer heat in the Florida Panhandle is not a gentle heat. It is the kind that presses down on you, that makes the air feel thick and still, that drives families to whatever water they can find. For Amanda Lewis and her 2 children, that meant the above-ground swimming pool behind their rural home in the small community of Esto. It was an ordinary summer afternoon. 7-year-old Adriana Hutto was a little girl by every account that existed, a child who laughed and played and existed in the uncomplicated way that children do when they believe the world around them is safe. Her 6-year-old brother, AJ, was there too, and their mother, Amanda, was supposed to be watching them. At some point that afternoon, Amanda Lewis dialed 911. She was crying. She was panicked. Her daughter, she told the operator, had fallen into the pool. Her daughter was unresponsive. Her daughter needed help. Emergency responders arrived to find Adriana Hutto beyond saving. The little girl was dead. What happened in the immediate aftermath of that phone call set in motion one of the most heartbreaking and complicated criminal cases the Florida Panhandle had seen in years. Because while the 911 call told one story, a 6-year-old boy named AJ told another. Children are sometimes the only witnesses to crimes committed in private. And the testimony of a child witness in a murder case is among the most legally complex and emotionally fraught categories of evidence in the criminal justice system. defense attorneys routinely challenge it. Questions about suggestibility, about coaching, about a young child's capacity to accurately recall and report traumatic events. All of these are legitimate legal and psychological considerations. But AJ's account was consistent. It was specific, and it was devastating. AJ told investigators that his mother had held Adriana down in the pool, that she had dunked her, that what happened to his sister was not an accident, that his mother had done it deliberately. The word dunked, a 6-year-old's word, unpolished and unlawyered, became the center of one of the most discussed criminal trials in the history of that part of Florida. Who was Amanda Lewis? By the accounts of those who knew her, she was a young woman with a complicated personal life, financial pressures, and, according to the prosecution's portrait of her, a child she did not want. Adriana, investigators would allege, represented a burden to her mother. The child was in the way. And on August 8, 2007, a hot summer afternoon with no witnesses except a 6-year-old boy, Amanda Lewis allegedly decided to remove that burden permanently. The forensic evidence presented at trial was consistent with drowning under circumstances that were not accidental. Medical examiners noted details in the examination of Adriana's body that raised significant questions about the official accident narrative. The prosecution built a case around AJ's testimony, the physical evidence, and what they characterized as the inconsistencies and implausibilities of Amanda Lewis's own account of events. The trial was swift by murder trial standards. In February of 2008, less than 7 months after Adriana died, Amanda E. Lewis was convicted of first-degree murder and aggravated child abuse. In March of 2008, she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Now, here is where this case becomes complicated in a way that CrimeCaseZone believes is important to address honestly, because our commitment is always to the full picture. In the years following Amanda Lewis's conviction, this case became one of the most analyzed and debated cases in the true crime community. Multiple podcasts, investigative journalists, and legal analysts have raised serious questions about the reliability of AJ's testimony, specifically about whether a 6-year-old who witnessed his sister's drowning was capable of providing an accurate account of events, and whether the circumstances of his initial interviews with investigators were conducted in a way that could have inadvertently influenced what he reported. Questions have been raised about interview techniques, about potential suggestion, and about the totality of the physical evidence. As of November 2025, Amanda Lewis's legal team has pursued post-conviction relief motions that remain active in the Florida court system. Her supporters argue that she is innocent. Her conviction supporters point to the consistency of AJ's account and the totality of the evidence presented at trial. What is not in dispute is this. On August 8, 2007, a 7-year-old girl named Adriana Hutto lost her life in a swimming pool in Holmes County, Florida. She was 7 years old. She had her whole life ahead of her. Whether by accident or by deliberate act, she is gone. And every person in that courtroom, on both sides, has had to live with that truth ever since. Amanda E. Lewis maintains her innocence from a Florida prison, where she continues to serve a life sentence. The case of Adriana Hutto remains one of the most disputed and emotionally charged cases in Florida criminal history. Whatever you believe about Amanda Lewis's guilt or innocence, one thing is unambiguous. Adriana Hutto deserved a childhood. She deserved to grow up. She deserved a summer afternoon in a pool that ended with sunburn and laughter and not with a 911 call. She deserved everything that was taken from her on that August day in 2007. And she deserves to be remembered. Adriana Hutto was 7 years old. If this story stays with you, please like this video, leave your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure you subscribe to CrimeCaseZone. Your support keeps these stories alive and keeps these children from being forgotten. We will be right back after a brief pause. Case 3. Natalie Jesslyn Wagner. The unspeakable thing she sold online. Port St. Lucie, Florida, arrested August 11, 2022. There are cases in true crime that test the limits of human language. Cases where no combination of words feels adequate to the horror being described. Cases that force even the most experienced investigators, prosecutors, and journalists to pause. Not for dramatic effect, but because the mind genuinely struggles to process what it is being asked to accept. The case of Natalie Jesslyn Wagner is one of those cases. We are going to handle this story with the seriousness and the restraint it demands. We will not sensationalize it. We will not be gratuitous. But we will tell it. Because these children existed, because what was done to them was done in secret, because it was done by the one person on earth who was supposed to be their entire world, and because the truth of what happened to them matters. Port St. Lucie, Florida is a city on the Treasure Coast, a growing community of families, neighborhoods, and sun-drenched streets that look, from the outside, like most of the residential Florida landscape. Natalie Wagner lived there with her 2 sons, a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old. She was their mother. She was their primary caregiver. She was the person responsible for feeding them, bathing them, keeping them safe, and loving them in the way only a parent can. Instead, she did something so profoundly evil that the prosecutor who handled her case, a professional who had spent years in the criminal justice system dealing with some of the darkest corners of human behavior, stood up in open court and called it one of the worst cases of sexual abuse he had ever personally encountered. Beginning at some point before her arrest in August of 2022, Natalie Wagner sexually abused both of her toddler sons. She filmed the abuse, and then she sold the videos on Snapchat, charging buyers between $5 and $50 per video to strangers on the internet who wanted to watch children being violated. Let that land for a moment. She sold videos of her babies being abused for $50 on a phone app. The investigation began when the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, which operates the cyber tip line, a system that receives reports of child sexual exploitation material from electronic service providers, received a tip related to content being distributed online. That tip was forwarded to law enforcement in Florida, and investigators began tracing the origin of the material. What they found led them to a house in Port St. Lucie. What they found in that house shattered even the investigators who were professionally prepared to see the worst. On August 11, 2022, Natalie Jesslyn Wagner was arrested. The charges were staggering in their volume and their severity. Prosecutors ultimately charged her with 84 counts, including capital sexual battery, lewd and lascivious molestation, possession and promotion of child sexual abuse material, incest, and sexual activity involving an animal. 84 counts against her own children who were 1 and 3 years old. The legal proceedings moved through the Florida court system, and on June 19, 2024, Natalie Jesslyn Wagner was sentenced. The judge handed down 21 life terms, plus an additional 800 years in prison. She will never breathe free air again. She will die in a Florida state prison. But here is the part of this story that carries the longest shadow. The part that does not end with the sentencing. Those 2 little boys are alive. As of the information available, they were removed from Wagner's custody, and they are growing up somewhere. Growing up without the memory of what happened, or perhaps, at some level that trauma leaves in the body long before the mind can name it, growing up with a shadow they may not be able to explain. They will one day be old enough to learn what was done to them. They will one day understand, in the full weight of adulthood, that the woman who sold videos of their abuse for $50 was their mother. No sentence handed down in any courtroom can fully address that reality. What the justice system could do, it did. 21 life terms. 800 additional years. The judge made certain there was no legal pathway by which Natalie Wagner would ever again have access to a child. And the cyber tip line, the system that started the investigation, processes millions of reports each year from electronic platforms that detect and report child sexual exploitation material. If you ever encounter anything online that appears to involve the sexual exploitation of a child, that system exists for exactly that purpose. Report it. It saves lives. In this case, it may have been what ultimately stopped Natalie Wagner before she could harm anyone else. 21 lives. Not 21 sentences. 21 lifetimes worth of punishment, stacked on top of each other, handed to a woman who traded her children's safety and their dignity for $50 on a phone screen. Some people do not deserve to see daylight. Natalie Jesslyn Wagner is one of them. This case is one of the most difficult stories we cover on CrimeCaseZone, and we are grateful you stayed with us through it. If this story moved you, please like this video and share it. Awareness about the cyber tip line and child safety resources saves lives. Subscribe to CrimeCaseZone and ring the notification bell so you never miss an episode. These children need us to keep talking. We are going to take a breath, and then we are going to continue. Case 4, Sheila Agee. The text message that ordered a murder. Pensacola, Florida, August 11, 2023. August 11, 2023. Pensacola, Florida. The kind of Friday morning that most people spend thinking about the coming weekend. Errands to run, plans to make. The ordinary rhythms of an ordinary day. Inside a Home Depot on the northwest side of Pensacola, employees were doing what retail workers do. Stocking shelves, helping customers, moving through the familiar landscape of a big box store on a summer morning. 18-year-old Brooklyn Sims was one of those employees, a young woman with her whole life unspooling ahead of her. A mother. Young, according to those who knew her, and alive in the way that very young people are alive. Full of the future, not yet aware of how quickly it can be taken. Brooklyn Sims would not leave that Home Depot alive. At some point during that morning, a man walked into the store, found Brooklyn Sims, and shot her 7 times. 7 times. His name was Keith Agee. And the woman who sent him there, the woman whose text messages, investigators would allege, had been directing the operation, pinpointing Brooklyn Sims's exact location within the store in real time, was his mother, Sheila Agee. To understand what happened inside that Home Depot, you have to understand the twisted family drama that preceded it. Keith Agee and Brooklyn Sims shared a child together, which meant that Brooklyn Sims and Sheila Agee, the baby's paternal grandmother, were bound together by the particular kind of complicated, fraught connection that comes when young parents who are no longer together have to navigate co-parenting with their respective families involved. By the accounts that emerged during investigation, Sheila Agee harbored deep animosity toward Brooklyn Sims. The exact nature of the dispute, the specific grievances, the escalating tensions, the precise point at which anger became homicidal intent, was laid out in the evidence that prosecutors assembled. And the centerpiece of that evidence was the text messages. Modern criminal investigations are transformed by digital evidence in a way that would have seemed like science fiction to investigators a generation ago. Text messages, the casual, unguarded, real-time communication that most people send without a second thought, have become among the most damning forms of evidence in the criminal justice system. Because people text things they would never say in front of a witness. Because the urgency of the moment overrides caution. Because killers, it turns out, sometimes coordinate murders by text message, apparently without fully grasping that those messages are recoverable. Investigators recovered text messages between Sheila Agee and her son Keith that, according to prosecutors, told the story of a planned, coordinated murder. The messages allegedly showed Sheila tracking Brooklyn Sims's movements, pinpointing her location within the Home Depot in real time, and directing her son toward her. 7 shots. Inside a place where people go to buy garden hoses and light fixtures. In front of customers. In front of co-workers. Because a mother decided that this young woman needed to die. Keith Agee was arrested and prosecuted separately for the shooting. Sheila Agee was arrested and charged as a principal to first-degree premeditated murder, a charge that holds those who direct, plan, or conspire to commit a murder equally culpable under Florida law as those who physically carry it out. The legal road to Sheila Agee's conviction was not a straight line. Her first trial ended in a mistrial in November 2024, a result that sent shockwaves through the Pensacola community and through Brooklyn Sims's grieving family, who had to reset, regroup, and face another trial. The criminal justice system, when it functions as it is supposed to, does not let a mistrial be the end of the story. It was not the end. On August 6, 2025, after a retrial, Sheila Agee was convicted of principal to first-degree premeditated murder. The jury deliberated and returned a verdict that said, "You planned this. You orchestrated this. You sent your son into that store with a target, and you tracked that target in real time, and 18-year-old Brooklyn Sims is dead because of you." Immediately upon conviction, Sheila Agee was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. There is a particular category of maternal crime that involves a mother weaponizing her own child. Weaponizing the love a son has for his mother, the loyalty a child carries for the person who raised them, the primal psychological connection between a parent and child, turning it into an instrument of murder. Keith Agee pulled the trigger. But Sheila Agee, according to the jury that convicted her, aimed him. Brooklyn Sims was 18 years old. She had a child of her own. That child, Keith Agee and Brooklyn Sims's baby, will grow up knowing that their grandmother helped orchestrate their mother's murder. Let that sentence sit with you for a moment. Sheila Agee is now serving life without parole in a Florida state prison. She will never see freedom again. Brooklyn Sims's family is still picking up the pieces of a loss that should never have happened in the paint aisle of a Home Depot on an ordinary Friday morning. And somewhere in Pensacola, a child is growing up without their mother, because a grandmother decided that her grievances were worth more than a young woman's life. Brooklyn Sims deserved to come home from work that day. If this case touched you, hit that like button, leave a comment, and subscribe to Crime Case Zone. We read your comments. We see you. And we keep doing this because of you. Stay with us. We are only halfway through. Case 5, Joanne Zafir. Mother's Day, Bleach, and the night everything broke. Poinciana, Osceola County, Florida, May 8, 2022. Mother's Day is supposed to be a celebration of the bond between a mother and her children. It is a day of handmade cards and crayon drawings, of breakfast made with small, clumsy hands, of the particular kind of love that only exists between a parent and a child who is still small enough to see the world entirely through the lens of that parent's existence. On the night of Mother's Day weekend, 2022, the night of May 8th, specifically, in the Osceola County community of Poinciana, Florida, something unthinkable unfolded. And when it was over, a 3-year-old girl was dead, her 8-year-old sister was traumatized and injured, and a woman named Joanne Zafir was standing in a church parking lot having committed acts that no framework of ordinary human psychology can adequately explain. The night began, according to the evidence that later emerged, with Joanne Zafir attacking her husband. The relationship between Zafir and her husband was complicated. Investigators would learn in the aftermath that the household had been a troubled one, that tensions had been building, that whatever internal world Joanne Zafir was inhabiting on that May night was not the internal world of a rational, stable person. She stabbed her husband. He survived. But the night was not over. Zafir left. She drove to wherever her 2 daughters, 3-year-old Destiny and 8-year-old Mia, were being kept with a relative, and she picked them up. Whether the children were happy to see her, whether they reached up for her with the automatic, unself-conscious trust that children extend to their mothers, whether they climbed into that car without the slightest sense of danger, we do not know. But they went with her. Of course they went with her. She was their mother. Zafir drove to a church parking lot. In the quiet of that night, in that empty lot, she forced both of her daughters to drink bleach. Bleach is a chemical compound, sodium hypochlorite, that is corrosive to human tissue. When ingested, it causes chemical burns to the mouth, throat, esophagus, and stomach. It causes vomiting, severe pain, and internal damage. It is not a gentle way to harm someone. It is slow, and it is painful, and it is cruel. 3-year-old Destiny did not die from the bleach. She survived it, her small body fighting through the chemical assault. But her survival, in the unfathomable calculus of what happened next, was not the outcome her mother had intended. And so Joanne Zafir did something else. She strangled her 3-year-old daughter to death. Destiny Zafir was 3 years old. 8-year-old Mia survived, injured, traumatized, and alive, in the way that survivors of things they should never have had to survive are alive, carrying it forever. Joanne Zafir was arrested. In the legal proceedings that followed, she claimed that a voodoo spell had been placed on her, that supernatural forces had compelled her actions, that she was not in control of what she did. The court did not accept this as a legal defense. Whatever Zafir believed about curses and supernatural compulsion, the law operates on the basis of actions and their consequences, not on the basis of claimed metaphysical influences. Zafir pleaded guilty to first-degree murder with a weapon and attempted first-degree murder. On February 24, 2025, nearly 3 years after the night she destroyed her family in a church parking lot in Osceola County, Joanne Zafir was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Destiny Zafir was 3 years old. She was at an age where the entire world still felt magical, where a parking lot at night might have felt like an adventure rather than a final destination, where she trusted her mother completely and without reservation, in the way that 3-year-olds trust the people who have always kept them safe. She should be in kindergarten right now. She should be losing teeth and arguing about bedtime and drawing pictures with too many colors and not enough precision and being, in every way, 3 years old becoming 4 years old becoming 5. Instead, Destiny Zafir is a name in a court file, a case number, a statistic in the grim arithmetic of Florida child homicide statistics. And somewhere in Osceola County, an 8-year-old girl named Mia is growing up with the memory of a church parking lot and a bottle of bleach and a night that Mother's Day weekend became the worst night of her life. Joanne Zafir will die in prison. It is the only appropriate outcome. For Destiny, rest in peace, little one. If this story moved you, please like this video and subscribe to Crime Case Zone. Tell us in the comments what you think should happen in cases where children survive these horrors. How do we support them? What does healing look like? We want to hear from you. Now let us continue. Case 6. Casey Anthony. The story that stopped America. Orlando, Orange County, Florida, June 16, 2008. If you were alive and paying attention in the summer of 2011, you know this name. You were probably watching on July 5th of that year, a day after Independence Day, when a jury in Orlando, Florida returned a verdict that ignited a national conversation, a firestorm of outrage, a flood of commentary, and a debate that continues to this day about the American justice system, about reasonable doubt, about what it means to be certain beyond a reasonable doubt that a mother killed her child. But before we get to that verdict, we have to go back to where the story truly begins. Not to the courtroom, not to the cameras, not to the cable news coverage that turned this case into a cultural phenomenon. We have to go back to a 2-year-old girl named Kaylee Marie Anthony, because this story is, above everything else, the story of a little girl who deserved better. Kaylee Anthony was born on August 9, 2005 in Orlando, Florida. By all accounts, she was a bright, happy, expressive little girl, the kind of child who fills a room with sound and movement and the particular electric energy of toddlerhood. She had dark eyes and a wide smile and the whole world ahead of her. Her mother, Casey Anthony, was 22 years old when Kaylee was born, young, social, and by the picture that emerged at trial, a young woman who found the responsibilities of motherhood increasingly constraining as Kaylee grew. Casey lived with her parents, George and Cindy Anthony, in a home in Orange County, Florida, a home that became the center of a national media spectacle in the summer of 2008. June 16, 2008 is the last confirmed date on which Kaylee Anthony was seen alive. She was seen that day at her grandparents' home. She was 2 years old. What happened after June 16th is where the story fractures, where the truth and Casey Anthony's version of events diverge so dramatically that the divergence itself became the defining feature of the case. Because for 31 days after Kaylee was last seen, Casey Anthony did not report her daughter missing. 31 days. During those 31 days, Casey went to nightclubs. She got a tattoo, the Italian words for beautiful life. She was photographed smiling at parties. She told an elaborate, intricate web of lies, that Kaylee was with a nanny named Zenaida Gonzalez, that everything was fine, that there was nothing to worry about. There was no Zenaida Gonzalez. There was no nanny. The woman Casey named as the nanny was a real person, but she had no connection to the Anthony family whatsoever. She was an innocent stranger whose name Casey had apparently encountered and co-opted as a prop in the fiction she was constructing. It was Cindy Anthony, Kaylee's grandmother, who finally called 911 on July 15, 2008, 29 days after the last known sighting of Kaylee. On that 911 call, Cindy Anthony told the operator that her daughter's car smelled like a dead body had been in it. That is a direct reference to what was said. The grandmother of a missing 2-year-old called 911 and described the smell of her daughter's car in terms that stopped the dispatcher cold. The search for Kaylee Anthony consumed the Orlando area and then the national media for months. Casey was arrested and charged with various offenses related to the deception. She told investigators story after story, each one falling apart under scrutiny, each one replaced with another story, an elaborate architecture of lies that investigators methodically dismantled. On December 11, 2008, nearly 6 months after Kaylee was last seen, a utility worker named Roy Kronk discovered skeletal remains in a wooded area not far from the Anthony family home. The remains were identified as Kaylee Anthony. She was found with duct tape associated with the area around her face and skull. The manner of death was ruled a homicide by the medical examiner. Casey Anthony was charged with first-degree murder, aggravated child abuse, aggravated manslaughter of a child, and 4 counts of providing false information to law enforcement investigators. What followed was the trial of the decade. It began in May of 2011 and consumed the American public through weeks of testimony, evidence, cross-examination, and the kind of coverage that only occurs when a case touches something deep in the collective psychology of a nation. The prosecution argued that Casey had used chloroform to render Kaylee unconscious and then applied duct tape to suffocate her. Motivated by a desire to be free of the responsibilities of motherhood, to live the carefree life she clearly preferred. The defense countered with a shocking alternative narrative, that Kaylee had accidentally drowned in the family pool, that George Anthony had found her and helped cover up the death, and that Casey's behavior was the product of a lifetime of trauma and abuse within her family. The forensic evidence was complex. Experts testified about chloroform traces found in the trunk of Casey's car, about the smell of decomposition detected by cadaver dogs, about the duct tape, and what it might or might not indicate. The defense's experts countered with alternative interpretations of each piece of evidence. The jury was left with a case built largely on circumstantial evidence, on behavioral patterns that were deeply suspicious, but that the prosecution could not connect with absolute certainty to the specific mechanism of Kaylee's death. On July 5, 2011, after deliberating for approximately 10 hours, the jury found Casey Anthony not guilty of first-degree murder, not guilty of aggravated child abuse, and not guilty of aggravated manslaughter of a child. They found her guilty on 4 counts of lying to law enforcement. The reaction was immediate, visceral, and nationwide. Social media, still relatively young in 2011, exploded. People gathered outside the courthouse in stunned disbelief. Legal analysts argued about the verdict for weeks. The jurors later spoke about their deliberations, about the state of the forensic evidence, about what they could and could not conclude beyond a reasonable doubt about the specific cause of Kaylee's death. Casey Anthony was released from jail on July 17, 2011, having received credit for time served. She walked out of the Orange County Jail in the early morning hours, and the footage of that moment was broadcast around the world. 2 of her lying to law enforcement convictions were later overturned on appeal. Casey Anthony, who has largely remained out of public view in the years since, resurfacing occasionally in documentaries and news coverage, has never been tried again for Kaylee's death. Double jeopardy protections under the United States Constitution mean that the not guilty verdict on the murder charge is final. Whatever the legal outcome, whatever the debates about reasonable doubt and forensic evidence and the competency of the prosecution, Kaylee Anthony deserved 30 more years at minimum. She deserved a childhood. She deserved the chance to become someone, to grow and learn and love and fail and try again in the magnificent, messy way that human beings grow. She got 2 years. 2 years and 31 days of silence. And then she was found in the woods. Kaylee Anthony was 2 years old. No verdict changes that. If you feel strongly about this case, leave your thoughts in the comments. This is one of the most discussed cases in American legal history, and we want to hear your perspective. Like this video, subscribe to CrimeCaseZone, and let us keep going. Because there are 4 more stories these children need us to tell. Case 7. Ana Maria Cardona. Baby lollipops and the boy nobody claimed. Miami Beach, Florida, November 2nd, 1990. November 2nd, 1990. Miami Beach, Florida. Someone walking through a residential neighborhood found a small body lying in the bushes. He was a little boy. He was approximately 3 years old. He weighed 18 pounds. A healthy 3-year-old boy typically weighs somewhere between 28 and 35 pounds. This child weighed 18 pounds, the weight of a child who had been systematically starved. His body bore the evidence of prolonged, repeated, systematic abuse. Burn marks. Signs of blunt force trauma. Ligature marks consistent with having been restrained. Evidence that he had been beaten with a blunt object, later determined to be a baseball bat. He was emaciated, injured, and dead, and nobody knew who he was. For weeks, this little boy had no name. The Miami community called him Baby Lollipops, a name given to him by media covering the case because of a small lollipop tattoo found on his body. That small, sweet detail. A lollipop, something joyful and childlike, against the backdrop of what had been done to him became one of the most haunting images in the case. Here was a child whose only distinguishing mark was a tiny piece of cheerful ink, lying dead in the bushes, unidentified and unmourned, in one of America's most vibrant cities. It took investigators weeks to establish who he was. His name was Lázaro Figueroa. He was the son of Ana Maria Cardona, a Cuban-born woman living in the Miami area, and he had been, in the months and years leading up to his death, subjected to a level of sustained, deliberate cruelty that is difficult to describe with adequate precision and even more difficult to read. What the investigation ultimately revealed was a pattern of abuse so severe, so prolonged, and so thoroughly documented by the physical evidence on Lázaro's small body that it left investigators, prosecutors, and eventually jurors with no framework to understand it except as an expression of something that has no polite name in ordinary human language. Ana Cardona, along with her companion Olivia Gonzalez, had subjected Lázaro to months of torture. He had been beaten with a baseball bat. He had been burned with cigarettes. He had been starved. He had been tied to a bed. He had been denied food, denied medical care, denied every basic element of human sustenance and dignity. He had been, in the most literal possible sense, tortured to death over an extended period of time. He was 3 years old. The trial of Ana Maria Cardona was one of the most emotionally charged proceedings in Miami's legal history. The evidence against her was overwhelming. The physical documentation of what had been done to Lázaro's body was conclusive. The testimony of those with knowledge of the household and the abuse was damning. In 1992, Ana Maria Cardona was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. But the case did not end there. The Florida Supreme Court overturned her conviction in 2001, citing issues with jury instructions, a legal technicality that sent the case back to the trial court. A second trial in 2004 resulted in another conviction and another death sentence. The Florida Supreme Court overturned that conviction as well, in 2010, this time citing issues related to victim impact evidence. 2 overturned convictions, 2 Supreme Court decisions. And each time, Ana Maria Cardona waited and Lázaro Figueroa waited, in the particular way that the dead wait for justice, which is patiently, without recourse, without the ability to advocate for themselves. A third trial, 2017. 27 years after Lázaro's body was found in those bushes in Miami Beach. 27 years after an unidentified 3-year-old boy lay in the undergrowth unnamed and unmourned. Ana Maria Cardona was convicted for the third and final time of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The death penalty was no longer on the table after a United States Supreme Court ruling changed the standards for capital sentencing, but the jury and the court made certain that Ana Maria Cardona would never walk free. At sentencing, the judge made a statement that has been quoted in coverage of this case many times since, because it captures something that mere legal language cannot. The judge observed that wild animals in the natural world demonstrate more instinctive care for their offspring than Ana Cardona ever showed Lázaro. That observation is not rhetorical flourish. It is, in fact, a medically and forensically accurate assessment of what the evidence showed. Ana Cardona is now in her late 60s. She is in a Florida state prison. Lázaro Figueroa, baby lollipops, the child who weighed 18 pounds when he died, the child who was found in the bushes with a lollipop tattoo and no one to claim him, has been gone for 35 years. He deserved a name spoken with love. He deserved a childhood. He deserved to grow up and become someone. Instead, he became a case number and a nickname given to him by a city that did not know he existed until after he was already gone. He was 3 years old. His name was Lázaro Figueroa, and he should never be forgotten. Lázaro Figueroa, we say his name on CrimeCaseZone. We will never stop saying it. If this story moved you, please like and subscribe. Leave a comment telling us what Lázaro's story means to you. And share this video so that more people know his name. Let us keep going. Case 8. Jessica Lacey McCarty. The chords, the calls, and the last words of 3 children. Palm Bay, Brevard County, Florida, March 20th, 2015. There is a detail in this case that will follow you long after you finish watching this video. We are going to get to it. We have to, because to leave it out would be to tell an incomplete story. But we want to prepare you. What comes at the end of this case is the hardest detail in this entire documentary. And this documentary has not been easy. March 20th, 2015. Palm Bay, Florida. Brevard County. A community on Florida's Space Coast. The kind of place that should be associated with launches and horizons, and the forward-looking possibility that the idea of space exploration represents. Instead, on this evening, Palm Bay became the site of one of the most devastating acts of familicide in the state of Florida's recent history. Jessica Lacey McCarty was a mother of three. 7-year-old Lacey, 6-year-old Philip, 5-month-old Christopher. 3 children, a range of ages from infant to early childhood. 3 lives in the most fragile, formative, dependent stage of human existence. On the evening of March 20th, 2015, Jessica McCarty killed all 3 of them. She strangled 6-year-old Philip with a cord. She strangled and drowned 7-year-old Lacey in the bathtub. She strangled 5-month-old Christopher, an infant, a baby who had been alive for 5 months, with a cord. After she killed them, she did several things that speak to the particularly fracturing horror of what occurred. She took photographs, bloody photographs of the crime scene, and she sent them to the father of baby Christopher before law enforcement arrived. And then she called 911. On that 911 call, she told the operator what she had done. She confessed. She described the deaths of her 3 children to an emergency dispatcher. First responders arrived at the scene and found exactly what she had told them they would find. The question that dominates every case like this, the question that investigators, mental health professionals, legal scholars, and ordinary people who encounter the story inevitably ask, is why? What state of mind leads a person to kill her own children? What despair, what delusion, what psychological catastrophe occurs in a human being that results in this? Jessica McCarty's legal proceedings moved quickly. She pleaded guilty on December 10, 2015 to 3 counts of first-degree murder. She did not contest the charges. She did not offer a defense that placed the responsibility elsewhere. On January 20, 2016, she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But now we come to the detail we promised you. The detail that investigators and prosecutors and journalists who covered this case have returned to, again and again, because it is impossible to forget. As Jessica McCarty killed each of her children, as she tightened the cord, as she held them down in the water, each child reportedly said, in the final moments of their life, "I love you, Mommy. I love you, Mommy. I love you, Mommy." 7 years old, 6 years old, 5 months old. They loved her until the very end. We have nothing to add to that. No commentary, no analysis, no framework of criminal justice or psychological theory makes those 4 words anything other than what they are, the most devastating sentence in this documentary. Jessica Lacey McCarty is serving 3 consecutive life sentences in a Florida state prison. She will die there. And somewhere in Brevard County, Florida, a case file sits with 3 names in it: Lacey, Philip, Christopher, and the knowledge that they went to sleep forever saying, "I love you," to the person who killed them. If you are a parent, if you have ever been loved by a child, sit with that for a moment. And then remember them. Lacey, Philip, Christopher. We say their names. We remember them. Please like this video in memory of these 3 children. Subscribe to CrimeCaseZone. Leave a comment below if this story affected you. We read every single one. We are almost at the end, and we thank you for staying with us this far. The last 2 cases are coming up. Case 9, Odette Liss-Josent. Miami, Florida, April 12, 2022. 7 words. 7 words that a woman said to police officers when she opened her front door in the Little Haiti neighborhood of Miami on the night of April 12, 2022. Come get them. I don't want them anymore. The officers who responded to that address that night had been called there by a series of hang-up 911 calls. Calls that connected and then disconnected, the kind that dispatch treats as emergency calls until proven otherwise. They arrived at the home of Odette Liss-Josent. She opened the door, and she said those 7 words. What the officers found inside that home, in a back room of that apartment in the Little Haiti area of Miami, is something that no amount of professional preparation fully equips a law enforcement officer to see. 5-year-old Laura and 3-year-old Jeffrey Josent, Odette's daughter and son, were found bound. Their ankles, their wrists, and their necks were tied with a thin red ribbon. Both children were dead. A thin red ribbon. 3 years old and 5 years old, bound with ribbon and gone. Odette Liss-Josent had strangled both of her children. She had tied them with that ribbon and taken their lives. And then she had called 911 and waited. When the officers came to the door, she did not attempt to flee. She did not pretend nothing had happened. She opened the door and told them to come get them, that she did not want them anymore. What investigators and prosecutors subsequently worked to understand was the world inside that apartment, the circumstances of Josint's life, her mental state, the factors that led to the deaths of Laura and Jeffrey. What was reported in the immediate aftermath suggested extreme stress, poverty, and what some accounts described as an extreme mental health crisis. Josint reportedly told officers that she believed her children were better off dead, that she had convinced herself, in whatever internal landscape she was inhabiting that night, that what she was doing was somehow a mercy. It was not a mercy. It was murder. And 5-year-old Laura and 3-year-old Jeffrey had no voice in it. Josint was charged with 2 counts of second-degree murder. The case has moved through the Miami-Dade court system in the years since. As of the most recent publicly available information in early 2026, the case is still working through the legal process, with no final verdict publicly reported at this time. Updates to this case will be covered on CrimeCaseZone as they become available. But the legal outcome, whatever it ultimately is, does not change what happened on April 12, 2022. It does not change the thin red ribbon. It does not change the 7 words she said when she opened the door. It does not change the fact that Laura was 5 and Jeffrey was 3, and they were found bound in the back room of an apartment in Miami while their mother waited at the front door. In the aftermath of this case, Miami-Dade County officials and child welfare advocates reiterated the importance of mental health resources, crisis intervention services, and the systems that exist, imperfectly, inadequately funded in many cases, but urgently needed, to identify and support parents who are in the kind of psychological crisis that precedes tragedies like this one. There are hotlines. There are crisis services. There are systems that exist specifically because the alternative is what happened to Laura and Jeffrey Josint. If you are a parent in crisis, if you are overwhelmed, if you are at a breaking point, if you are in a place where the darkness is winning, there are people whose entire purpose is to help you through it. The National Parent Helpline, 1-800-4PARENTS. The Crisis Text Line. Text HOME to 741741. The 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. Call or text 988. Laura and Jeffrey Josint are gone. They cannot be brought back. But if sharing their names and their story keeps one more family from reaching that threshold, if one more parent picks up the phone before they reach a point of no return, then their story has done the only thing it can still do in the world. For Laura and for Jeffrey, we see you. We remember you. Please like this video, subscribe to CrimeCaseZone, and share it with anyone who needs to hear these stories. And if you or someone you know needs help, please use the resources we just shared. We have one more case, and it is unlike anything else in this documentary. Case 10. Josefina Cardona, the mother who hired a hitman. Lake Worth Beach, Palm Beach County, Florida, arrested May 6, 2024. Every case in this documentary involves a mother who crossed a line so far beyond the boundaries of acceptable human behavior that it is nearly impossible to understand. But this final case is different in one specific, important way. It does not involve a mother harming her own children. It involves a mother whose love for her child, or more precisely, whose distorted, weaponized, catastrophically misapplied version of maternal love led her to try to have 2 innocent people killed. It is a case about what happens when maternal love curdles into something unrecognizable. When the protective instinct that drives a mother to fight for her child becomes detached from any moral foundation and transforms into something that would sacrifice innocent lives on the altar of a woman's refusal to accept consequences. Josefina Cardona, Lake Worth Beach, Palm Beach County, Florida. Her story begins not with her own crime, but with her son's. In June of 2022, a 5-year-old child's birthday party in Palm Beach County became the scene of a murder. Josefina's son, 16-year-old Manuel, stabbed 19-year-old Andres Alvarado to death at that party. A teenager killing a young man at a child's birthday party. The grotesque, senseless collision of innocence and violence that leaves a community speechless. Manuel Cardona was arrested and charged with Alvarado's murder. The prosecution of Manuel Cardona moved through the legal system. Witnesses cooperated. Evidence was presented. In February of 2024, Manuel Cardona was sentenced to 15 years in a Florida correctional facility for the killing of Andres Alvarado. Josefina Cardona, according to investigators, did not accept this outcome. In the months following her son's sentencing, Josefina allegedly became consumed by a desire for revenge against the people she held responsible for putting him behind bars. Specifically, two witnesses whose cooperation with prosecutors she believed had been decisive in her son's conviction. Two people who had told the truth in a court of law. Two people who had done exactly what the legal system asks ordinary citizens to do when they witness a crime. Come forward, testify, tell what they know. Josefina Cardona allegedly decided those two people needed to die. What followed was, from a law enforcement perspective, a textbook sting operation, the kind that Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office investigators are trained to execute precisely because the solicitation of murder is, unfortunately, not an uncommon crime, and because the best way to prevent a murder that is being planned is to intercept the planning before it reaches its intended conclusion. A confidential informant, someone with access to Josefina Cardona's circle, brought the plot to law enforcement. Undercover detectives were deployed. Josefina, believing she was dealing with actual contract killers, met with undercover investigators. She discussed the murders she wanted committed. She pinpointed the locations of her intended targets, reportedly traveling to the actual homes of the two witnesses to show the undercover detective exactly where they lived. She agreed to pay $4,000 per murder, a total of $8,000 to have two witnesses killed, two people whose only offense was telling the truth. On May 6, 2024, the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office arrested Josefina Cardona. The charges were serious: 2 counts of solicitation to commit first-degree murder and 2 counts of first-degree premeditated murder under Florida's principal theory, which holds that someone who solicits a murder is as legally culpable as the person who would have carried it out. She was held on a $550,000 bond. At the time of her arrest, authorities also noted that Josefina Cardona is not a United States citizen, which means that in addition to potential criminal imprisonment, she faces the possibility of deportation if convicted. The case against Josefina Cardona, as of early 2026, is working through the Palm Beach County court system. No final verdict has been publicly reported, but the facts as established by the investigation are not in serious dispute. She met with people she believed were hired killers. She drove them to her targets' homes. She negotiated a price. She was prepared to have 2 people murdered because they told the truth about what her son did. And her son, the young man whose future she was allegedly willing to destroy 2 innocent lives to protect, is sitting in a Florida prison serving 15 years for a murder he actually committed. The tragedy here is layered in a way that the other cases in this documentary are not. Manuel Cardona did commit a crime. He killed someone. He is in prison because he earned that prison sentence. His mother's fury at the legal system that convicted him does not change that. Her love for him, if that is what we call this, did not protect him. It put her on trial and potentially added decades to the legal shadow over their family. The 2 witnesses who testified are alive. They are alive because law enforcement moved quickly, because the informant came forward, because the sting was executed before the plan progressed beyond planning. They are alive and they deserve to remain alive, because telling the truth in a court of law is the foundation of a functioning justice system, and anyone who threatens that foundation threatens something that all of us depend on. Andres Alvarado is still dead. He was 19 years old at a 5-year-old's birthday party, and he is still dead. And 2 witnesses who told the truth about it nearly paid for that truth with their lives. Josefina Cardona's case will continue to be followed and reported. When a verdict is reached, CrimeCaseZone will bring it to you. This final case proves that maternal love, when it becomes untethered from morality and consequence, can be as destructive as outright cruelty. Like this video, leave a comment on which case in today's documentary affected you the most, and make absolutely sure you are subscribed to CrimeCaseZone, so you are here when we cover the verdict in this case. We will be back. 10 cases, 10 women, 10 stories from the state of Florida that represent, collectively, a document of the worst possible violation of the most fundamental human contract. The agreement between a parent and a child that the child is safe, that the child is loved, that the parent is the last line of defense against a dangerous world rather than the source of the danger itself. Let us say their names one final time. Because they deserve it. Because the law says their mother's names more often than it says theirs. Because true crime as a genre sometimes gets so caught up in the psychology of the perpetrator that it forgets to honor the simple, irreducible humanity of the victim. A premature baby girl in Baker County, who spent her first months being poisoned by the one person who should have been willing to die before she let harm come to her daughter. 7-year-old Adriana Hutto, who was found unresponsive in a pool in Holmes County on a hot August day and never came home. 2 toddler boys in Port St. Lucie, 1-year-old and 3 years old, who were abused in ways that should not be named in the same breath as childhood by the woman who brought them into the world. 18-year-old Brooklyn Sims, who went to work at a Home Depot in Pensacola on a Friday morning and was shot 7 times because a mother decided her grievances outweighed a young woman's life. 3-year-old Destiny Zafir, who was forced to drink bleach in a church parking lot on Mother's Day weekend by the woman who was supposed to be her mother forever. 2-year-old Kaylee Anthony, who was last seen alive on June 16, 2008, and whose remains were found in the woods 6 months later, and who deserved so much more than what the world gave her. 3-year-old Lazaro Figueroa, baby lollipops, who weighed 18 pounds when he died in Miami Beach in November of 1990, and who spent his final months being beaten, burned, starved, and restrained, and who deserved to grow up in the sunshine that the state he lived in is named for. 7-year-old Lacey, 6-year-old Philip, and 5-month-old Christopher McCarty, who each said, "I love you, Mommy," as they died in Palm Bay in March of 2015. 5-year-old Laura and 3-year-old Jeffrey Josent, who were found bound with a thin red ribbon in a Miami apartment on April 12, 2022, and who deserved every day they did not get. And Andres Alvarado, 19 years old, at a birthday party in Palm Beach County, whose death set in motion a chain of events that nearly ended 2 more lives. Say their names. Remember their faces. Tell their stories. Because the way a society treats the deaths of its most vulnerable members, the way it investigates, the way it prosecutes, the way it holds itself accountable for the systems that failed these children before anyone with a badge was called, says everything about what kind of society it actually is, as opposed to what kind of society it believes itself to be. Florida has sunshine and beaches and 45 million annual visitors and theme parks built on the idea that the world is a magical place. It also has these 10 cases, and thousands more like them, in counties and cities and small rural communities all across the state, where children have been failed by the people who should have been their whole world. We cover these cases at CrimeCaseZone not because suffering is entertainment. We cover them because darkness does not shrink when you look away from it. It grows. It is only when you shine a light directly at it, when you say the names and tell the stories and refuse to let the public memory fade, that the darkness becomes something that can be measured, understood, and fought. If you are a parent, hold your children a little closer tonight. If you know a child who seems unsafe, make the call. The Florida Department of Children and Families Abuse Hotline is 1-800-962-2873. It is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and that call can be made anonymously. If you are a parent in crisis, if you are overwhelmed and at a breaking point, please reach out before you reach the edge. The 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline is available by call or text. The National Parent Helpline is 1-800-4PARENTS. Help exists. Use it. These children deserve their futures. We cannot give those futures back. What we can do is carry their stories, speak their names, and refuse to look away. This has been CrimeCaseZone. Thank you for being here for every minute of it. If this documentary moved you, if even one of these stories stayed with you, changed something in how you see the world, made you want to make a call, hold your child, or fight for a safer system, please hit the like button right now. It takes 1 second, and it helps this channel reach more people who need to hear these stories. Leave a comment below telling us which case hit you the hardest, and subscribe to CrimeCaseZone with the notification bell turned on so you never miss an episode. We are here every week, bringing you the cases that deserve to be told. We will see you in the next one. CrimeCaseZone, we do not look away. We do not forget.